I approach my work from a very emotional place. I come from an illustrative background before I ever got into clay, and I think you can tell because my sculptures are usually very symbolic. I took my first clay class in undergrad on accident, and I fell in love with the way clay seemed to be so suited to making organic shapes. So in undergrad at Santa Clara University, I started with human and animal figures. Their concepts were basically elemental, and I tried to make them expressive as possible in a recognizable way. I was highly influenced by my religion and mythos during this period, and in particular, classical stone sculpture. My palettes really echoed that kind of aesthetic, and I developed a taste for slightly muscular nude figures with large, strong hands and animal features. In undergrad, it was kind of a toss-up between whether I wanted to go with painting or whether I wanted to go with sculpture, and I turned out some pretty dramatic works in the last 2 years that I was there. Even then, I was starting to work with social themes such as the impact of mental illness. I leaned towards high contrast lighting and took my first steps into magical realism with my Just Add Water series that always featured a goldfish. Pre-grad school had to be some of my strongest work. I began sculpting women more heavily transformed, part human, part deer. I was working 60 hours a week and taking the bus across town to the studio 3 days a week, and I feel like the fear and the stress really poured into my work and made it some of the most dynamic. It was all about my overwhelming fears, the eternal burden of chronic health issues, and my anxiety over the future. I created my first monstrous forms. I remember the first day of grad school choosing studios, and the night before anyone else got to work on my first piece and started continuing my themes of health using expressive animals. And then suddenly what I was doing wasn't working anymore. And when I came up against negative feedback, I got lost in the woods and started trying to circle back to old interests in hopes that I would be able to revive my creative output. So I started making these little monsters with no rhyme or reason other than to stretch my creature concept models. During this time, I really struggled with justifying my figure building and it stagnated. Year two of grad school is still a struggle, but I managed to come back to figures, focusing for petty reasons on faces. In an attempt to refresh my work, I went back again to old hobbies. I created a series of disjointed dolls based on Asian ball-jointed dolls, using them to explore self-worth and how it is impacted by certain circumstances. I hope to open dialogue about social issues such as domestic abuse, neurodivergence, drug use, and reproductive rights. I particularly enjoyed doing the underglaze on this project. I used it to mimic the makeup of BJDs. Also, my little lumpy monsters evolved into what I now dub Home Guardians, and I made a giant one for no reason at all. As I circle back around to my master's thesis, I'm trying to go back to basics, back to my roots, back to my heritage, and the blended human-animal figure that I enjoy.